I would like to give a brief introduction about Seib Insurance and Reinsurance Company, being your local insurer, and the main challenges behind cyber insurance. As you know, Seib is a Qatari national insurance and reinsurance company. Our strategy is based on the guiding principle of offering quality products and services to its customers. The customer satisfaction is a top priority for Seib, and that's why once it comes to the service level, Seib is considered to be the first choice insurer. We can provide customized, comprehensive, and competitive insurance programs as per our customers' needs. Seib has consistent and seamless approach to claims management, and our team is highly experienced in risk control, which are capable to handle complex claims and assist our customers efficiently. Our dedicated industry-specific underwriters provide superior solutions to your business insurance needs. Seib is also specialized in assisting customers to reduce their risks and meet their insurance objectives. Although Seib offers a lot of products lines to its customers, which are based on the competitive edge and which fulfill the requirements of our customers through innovative insurance solutions. We offer a lot of products, but the given below are the main lines of business which we offer. I'm not going to name each and every sub-line under here the main lines, but I will simply mention about the main lines. We cover specialty lines. We have engineering insurance. We have property insurance. We also offer marine insurance. We offer motor insurance, casualty lines of business, and miscellaneous accident. Also, you can see from cyber insurance perspective, we have highlighted the main challenges which emerge the need for the cyber insurance here. As you may see that the cyber risk continues to rise up. The list of concerns for the business leaders worldwide. Almost a third of the world's population is online, with e-commerce occurring between countries at the push of a button, and cyberspace used to influence social changes. Cyberspace is also used as a mechanism to steal, compromise, or destroy critical data. Criminals, terrorists, hacktivists are engaged in a range of crimes, fraud, propaganda, and espionage. Cyber attacks have potential to be rapid, highly damaging, and public, which can lead to declining investor and customer confidence. Due to the rate increase in the cybercrime, of course, it emerges the need for the insurance. A strong dependence on the IT for everyday activities also require the organizations to have the cyber insurance with them for their protection. An attack can lead to a close of a business or dramatically changing the nature of the business. Cyber risk survey, which was done in the UK, showed 53% of the CEOs believe that they have an insurance cover for the cyber, whereas only 10% do. Large firms are gradually improving their cyber security methods. ABI, which is the Association of British Insurers, predicts within next decade, cyber insurance will be as common as property insurance. Qatar managed security market is projected to demonstrate substantial growth to grow at a CAGR of over 47.8% during 2018 to 2014. For more services about Seib's, you can log into our website or call us at our call center to answer more. And before moving to the cyber insurance topic in more details, I would like to mention that although a business is responsible for its own cyber security, but in the event of a cyber attack, having the right insurance will mean you are not alone. Cyber liability cover will provide crucial support to help your business stay afloat. After going through the presentation of our guest, Alex Juma, we will be able to understand on how does cyber insurance work and its importance. So Alex, the screen is yours to continue now.
Thank you very much. Let's just get this up. Thank you very much for the introduction and a great primer on the world of cyber insurance. We'll go into a little bit more depth. I just wanted to give you a brief introduction on who I am and what my company does. Tokyo Marine Kiln is the product of an acquisition of Kiln Syndicate, which was established in 1963. And in 2014, we were acquired by the Japanese Tokyo Marine Group. As a Lloyd's syndicate, we benefit from A+ rated capacity. And Tokyo Marine Kiln were one of the first Lloyd's syndicates to ever write a cyber policy, actually in 2003, if you can believe it or not. And due to our depth of experience in this market, we've actually paid over $100 million of cyber insurance claims to date. So, and the reason we give you that number is not to say because we're a bad insurer, it's because we've been in the market so long that we've seen the length and breadth of types of cyber claims that exist. And as consumers, you want to know that the product you're buying will do what it says. And with new lines of insurance business, we believe it's very, very important to partner with a carrier that has experience in adjusting these losses. And we'll go on to discuss why that's so important for cyber insurance in particular. But before we get into the nuts and bolts of the insurance coverage, what we really need to understand is the exposure. And the best way to describe that is just have a look at this wheel. This is what happens in 60 seconds on the internet. Now, this is mainly focused around social networks, but if you have a quick look at some of the statistics, we have 18 million texts sent in a single minute. We have 188 million emails sent. If we look at this in a more commercial context, think about your own businesses and think about the technology that you rely on. Everybody on this call will be using something like Microsoft Outlook in order to communicate and to manage their calendars. Just think what would happen to your business if I took away your ability to use Microsoft Outlook and what the financial impact that would be. You would be missing critical data, you'd be missing your calendar, you wouldn't know who had been emailed, what work was outstanding. And that's just one piece of software. If you think about other pieces of software that you use in your business, you'll have databases, you'll have communication platforms, you'll have HR and finance software, all designed to make sure that you benefit from efficiencies that technology brings. But the reliance on that technology brings a risk, and that risk can be exploited. What we want to discuss are the exposures in cyber insurance and cyber generally. This is called the CIA triad. It stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And these are the goals of cybersecurity. At the top, we have confidentiality, and this is what we often talk about with data, with IT security, and that's protection of data. So much of the insurance this type of insurance is sold on the basis of protection against a data breach. And whilst that's a big exposure, our experience in the Middle East has shown that although it's not the biggest, what we're more concerned with the two bottom ones, the integrity and the availability of systems. So integrity is whether the data that you actually hold is accurate. So think about, let's just use the example of the insurance policies that you may buy and sell. If you don't have access to your insurance policy, you don't know your policy reference number, you don't know the limits of indemnity, you don't know what coverage you have, you don't even know who the carrier is. So if that data was taken away from you, you theoretically wouldn't be able to make an insurance claim. And that applies to all data. If a hospital doesn't have access to patient records and that the patient records are incorrect, that's also a cybersecurity concern because there's a healthcare outcome. And finally, availability. Availability of your systems is very important. Again, I used the example in the last slide of what would happen if I took away your ability to use a piece of software. What we're seeing more and more now with cyber attacks is integrity of data being compromised by hackers, as well as the availability of systems being taken away from the companies, meaning large financial losses are incurred, either from increased costs of working or loss of profit, very much similar to a property business interruption loss. And we'll go on to talk about some case studies later and why this is so important for the region. But cyber attacks are not acts of God. It's not like a fire or an earthquake or a fortuitous risk. It's act of man. And as a result, there's various people who we're at risk from. The first is the nation state, the country. Cyber attacks offer a way in which countries can attack other countries and a country's assets without actually setting foot on the ground in that country, without sending planes, without sending missiles. Some countries have the capability of shutting down utilities like power grids, and we saw this when Russia annexed the Crimea a few years ago. All of the Ukrainian power grid was knocked out by Russian hackers, and if you can knock out the power grid, you've effectively shut down a country, and they managed to achieve this before they actually committed to a physical invasion. And similarly, certain companies are going to be under risk of nation states. For instance, a defense company that's designing equipment for the military. Foreign states may be interested in having a look at what's there. The next are hacktivists. These are simply just activists who are particularly good with computers. A very good example of this was there was an attack against SeaWorld theme park in the US. in the last decade, and these were animal rights activists who were protesting the treatment of killer whales, and they managed to shut down the parks. They weren't able to take any card payments. They weren't able to sell any tickets online, and as a result, SeaWorld theme parks suffered a huge loss of profit from the removal of their systems. The next one is organised crime, and this is probably the biggest group that everyone's at risk from. The international market for cybercrime is now much bigger than the international drugs market, which itself is over $100 billion a year. And estimates, it's very difficult to say, but the estimates for cybercrime, it's worth over $600 billion a year. And a lot of companies I speak to often think, you know, we're not a big company, we're not global, we're not listed, or whatever it might be. So we're not at risk of criminals. Why would they bother with us? But that couldn't be further from the truth. There's a lot of money that you can make as a cyber criminal. You don't have to. Again, there's no risk of physical harm if you want to rob a business using cyber tactics. You're not at risk of going to jail. You can do it from anywhere in the world. And really, this is where we're seeing the most amount of action in terms of our claims. And again, we'll discuss some of these later. Rogue employees are also a problem. These are people within the business who might be disgruntled. They might decide to leak data, or they might decide to shut down the systems. Again, this is an exposure because if you don't have access to your systems or your data, then you've had a cyber loss. And then finally, human error. The people operating the IT. This is always the first line of defense. And as we'll go on to discuss, you can have all the IT security in the world, all the best processes, but if the people operating the computers are compromised, either by phishing attacks, whether they're sent a link in an email which they click, that's also a concern, and we have to manage that risk as well. So what do we actually do with a cyber policy? Now, cyber insurance is not like a fire insurance policy. Let's say if a building burns to the ground, there's very little that your insurer can do other than maybe call the fire brigade to come and put the fire out. But cyber attacks occur and the damage can take literally minutes or hours to manifest. But because the damage is non-physical and because of the amount of connectivity we have, because of the modern internet, we can actually respond to incidents on a worldwide basis remotely, meaning that as soon as something happens, we actually have a 24/7 hotline that everyone can call. And you can speak to either a lawyer or an IT security expert, whatever the issue may be, and they can provide the initial incident response, that consultation. And that's really key because if you have a hold on your incident, the outcome will be a lot better. And we'll go on to discuss why that's so important again later in some case studies. Once we've actually got a hold of the incident, we then begin to look at recovery means, whether that's stopping leakage of data and securing that data by taking out credit freezes and credit bureaus for affected individuals, whether that's speaking to an IT forensics company to determine the extent of the loss, or just simply to get systems back up and running where they've been brought down by hackers. And then once all the damage has been rectified, we can appoint forensic accountants to look at the scope of a loss. If it's a business interruption loss, we provide funding for legal defense so that we can defend against actions from third parties where their data has been stolen. And effectively, that's the last piece of the puzzle. The most important of the first two, the repair and the recovery, because once we managed to get systems back online, once we've determined the extent of the loss, we have a roadmap on how to manage the incident. But the longer you leave this process, the worse the loss will be. So it's really important to partner with an experienced carrier like us because we've seen a lot of ththese incidents. We deal with at least 2 new cyber incidents every day, so we have a huge depth of experience, meaning that your clients will be well looked after in the event of a claim, and you don't need to be worrying, will these guys get it right? So in terms of the actual coverage that we offer, I don't want to bore you with wording stuff. No one wants to sit here and listen to it, but we touched on the last slide on what we do, and here's how it ultimately plays out. So at the top, we've got the costs required to respond to an incident, and in the industry, we call this breach response. So we provide the legal as a first port of call, and the reason we want you to speak to a lawyer is because you will benefit from legal privilege. Once you call the hotline, you become a client of that law firm that we've appointed to respond to incidents in the region, and then all of the work that is undertaken by that law firm is privileged, and that's really important in the event of future litigation or potential regulatory actions, because that information can be protected and your interests are better served. The next port of call will be an IT forensics firm, and again, these will be appointed by the lawyers, and what they will effectively do is conduct a scan of the network to determine the scope and extent of the loss. And from there, we have an idea of what's happened and what head of coverage would be applicable. We've also providing coverage for public relations because a lot of these incidents Once they occur, they get into the press, and it's really, really important that anybody who is putting out statements has been coached, that they know what to say, because ultimately you want to ensure that your reputation is intact and that you have the confidence of your customers or your stakeholders or your shareholders. If you don't know what you're doing when you have a cyber incident, it will show very early on and it will look a lot worse. And this is particularly a problem for listed companies, as there are share price implications with cyber incidents as well. And at the bottom, we've got the actual reimbursement insuring agreements. So we've got first party for gross profit and extra expense incurred as a result of an outage to a system, and then the restoration and the recovery of data. And again, this is where we're seeing most of our claims, particularly outside of the US. We don't see very many data breaches. We're seeing far more first party cyber losses. And it's not just a regional concern for the Middle East, it's a global concern. Everybody uses the same technology. You are either using Microsoft or Linux or Apple hardware, you are either using Amazon Web Services or Oracle or Google Cloud for your outsourced services. You're using all the same software that's in the same programming language. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. I can shut you down, I can hold you to ransom, and you will either suffer a loss of profit and you will suffer damage to your systems. And that's what this first party insuring agreement covers. Third-party insuring agreements cover liabilities for third parties for loss of data, and this isn't really a concern for many businesses, particularly in the Middle East, as there aren't very many strong data protection regulations. There isn't the litigation culture that you see, say, in the US, and we haven't actually seen fines and penalties issued by regulators in the region. So, whilst data breach is a concern for companies from an insurance perspective, we don't see it as a huge exposure. We provide this coverage as standard. But we have a lot of experience responding to data breaches in any event. So whether you have a first or third party loss, we are a safe pair of hands. So I wanted to actually explain, what does a claim actually look like? So this is one that occurred in the last 6 months here at Kiln. It was a food manufacturer. So the insured is a large producer of meat products, and this meat product is beef jerky. It's a dried meat product that is consumed quite a lot in the US. You would have thought for something that, like for a preserved meat product, that there wouldn't be that much IT implementation in the production process, but apparently there was. Hackers used a common exploit to gain access to the insured's network remotely. So once they got access to the production network, they figured out what the production network was doing, what the output was, what the financial loss would be to the insured. They then looked around the rest of the network to figure out where the backup facilities were. And again, every customer I speak to will always tell me, we back up all of our data, it's in the clouds, it's all fine. These attackers managed to find out where the backup facilities were, and they made these unavailable. Once they'd undertaken that action, they shut down the main production network, and they first demanded a ransom of over $500,000. Now, again, this is a factory. They couldn't produce any goods. They had orders to fulfill. Every minute, an hour that was going past, they were losing money because they had quotas to fulfill. They have contracts that they need to ensure that they meet the obligations for. So effectively, the hackers had them up against the wall. Ultimately, what we discovered when we responded to the incident was the network had been damaged and the downtime was unavoidable. We didn't in fact pay the ransom in this instance because there's so much damage to the network that we were going to incur a loss anyway. So we cut off communication with the hackers and we said, we're not going to pay your ransom. And ultimately there was a $5 million primary limit. And this was a outage lasting 3 days. So you have to think about this from the perspective of your own business. What would your estimated daily financial loss be if you had absolutely no access to your IT and you had no ability to conduct your operations? And really, this is the nuts and bolts of what we are covering. This is an exposure that we are seeing on a worldwide basis. Tokyo Marine Kiln deals with a ransom demand on a weekly basis, which exceeds $1 million. We have seen claims where we have ransom demands of over $25 million. And again, these are very sophisticated criminals who are doing deep level reconnaissance of networks. They're not just coming into your network and dropping a virus. They're not crap little kids doing this for fun. These are people making serious money, and they have very high technical skills. They're in countries where you can't extradite them. So the exposure is here to stay. This isn't something that we can do anything about. It's something we have to live with. what you, for those of you that don't necessarily have an IT security background, these bullet points might look a bit like easy to do, but ultimately this is a very sophisticated attack where reconnaissance is undertaken of a network. All of the backup facilities were mapped out. Any safeguards were known well ahead of time. In fact, in this case, the hackers had done so much reconnaissance that they actually sent us in the course of the breach response, when we were negotiating the ransom, they actually sent us a copy of the cyber insurance policy that they held of us and said, we know that you buy cyber insurance, so we know that you have coverage. This is how much money we want. So these guys are getting more and more sophisticated, and we're only seeing more and more of these attacks. And if you read the insurance press recently, I mean, in the last week, Cognizant, which is a very large IT managed service provider, they were attacked. A company called Garmin, which make wearable technology, they were hacked. Earlier on in the year, there were other managed service providers. I mean, and again, these are publicly known. You have to remember, you don't have to declare if you had a ransomware attack. It's a first-party incident. So many of these actually go unreported and are not known about. And lots of insurance carriers will probably tell you, no, we're seeing the same thing. So really, really important. It's probably it's the biggest exposure that we're seeing right now. Most people don't have any coverage for it whatsoever. And worse still, if you don't have the insurance cover, you don't have the breach response. So again, you have to think about, in addition to the daily estimated financial loss that your business may suffer, you have to really be thinking about, what would I actually do if I came in on Monday morning and my systems have been hacked and I couldn't operate my business? What would you do? Who would you speak to? What would you tell your staff? What would you tell your shareholders? These are all things that most people in business have never experienced, so they don't have any idea. And of course, if you're in that position, your outcome's going to be a lot worse. So with all of that said, let's discuss why to insure. I mean, peace of mind is the main thing. The fact that you have access to experienced breach response services, that you have those people just a phone call away, I think is the main selling point of the policy. We're not just providing the indemnity, we're also providing the service, and the service point is critical because it will protect your reputation. You want to understand that people will be looking closely at what's going on with businesses that get hacked. Your partners may not want to deal with you, your customers may not want to deal with you. There may be regulatory concerns. These are all things that people don't necessarily think about, but can happen, and it can happen to anybody. And as we discussed earlier on in the presentation, the exposure to cyber risk is only going to grow because we're only using more and more technology. Technology isn't going away. Most filing is done electronically. Most communications are done by email. That's just a basics thing. Every industry has its own specific software that it uses. Everybody is using cloud storage. So you get my point. Ultimately, this exposure isn't being reduced, and it's certainly not going away. And as Asad mentioned earlier on, cyber insurance will become as common as property insurance because your cyber assets will need to be insured before long, and there's a wealth of experienced carriers able to offer this. So my advice would be speak to Seib and get some quotes. I think we've got a Q&A now, so I'll hand back over to Asad. I think he actually had a first question, so I'll let you kick off.
Thank you very much, Alex. We have, of course, received the questions. The first question I would like to mention, post-claim protocols in case of a breach, what is required from the insured?
So all that we ask that the insured does when they know that they have an incident is to call the hotline. That's it, in a reasonable time frame. And you have to remember, again, the quicker you call the hotline, the better your outcome will be. So please engage with us because we have the experience. We know what we're doing. We know that these kind of incidents might be very, very scary if it's never happened to you before. But you need to keep a cool head. The number is available it's printed on all the policies. And of course, if you are customers, feel free. You can speak to us anytime if you have any questions about how we would respond. And we can provide details on the actual breach response panel that we use for the region as well.
The second question we have also received, what kind of liability could arise due to the human error, and how does insurance assist in protecting the client? So this is referring to the human error you mentioned in the beginning. So can you elaborate?
So the two most common human error incidents that we see, so if we start with third party, the US was the first major market for cyber insurance, and the healthcare industry was one of the largest buyers. And one of the most frequent claims that we used to have was doctors that had laptops and they did not encrypt the laptop. And what they would do is they'd get on a train or their car would get stolen and the laptop would be in the car. Now, if the laptop's unencrypted, it means anyone can get on the laptop and they can see the patient's data. Now, although there's no hacking, there's nobody that's got into the hospital's network and extracted the data has been exposed. So it's a privacy breach, so it's covered. If you called that into us, we'd respond in the normal way. In such incidents of loss of third-party data, the first thing we'd want to do is establish whose data has been stolen, so we can contact them and say, we're sorry to report that we've lost your data. This is actually obligatory in some countries, so we notify the individuals. And again, that's something that we can do on a voluntary basis as well. We then look to protect their identities, so we buy either a credit freeze or identity theft insurance for those individuals. And it might not cost a lot individually, maybe $15 a head, but if you say lose a laptop with 2 million records, that can be a very, very expensive breach. For first-party human error-related losses, the most common we see are phishing attacks. So a hacker will send an email to an individual in an organization. The individual trusts the content of the email and they click on a link. And in that, after following that, the hacker will have access to the network through various ways. But they wouldn't have been able to do it if there wasn't a human error aspect. But human error is pervasive across the whole of cyber insurance. So we don't, as long as the covered peril has been achieved, we're not really concerned with whether it was caused by a hacking attack or by human error. We don't necessarily distinguish between the two. For data protection, we say any exposure of third-party data. So again, it doesn't have to be a hack. And for a phishing attack, that's a security breach because a network has been compromised. So we're not going to say human error is excluded ever.
Okay, I think most of the part of the question is answered, but I would like to also mention, other than the cyber, the errors and omissions can also be purchased through different other lines of business, like medical malpractice is one of the examples. The other one is the PI,
yep.
Where very traditional professions such as lawyers, accountants, architects, engineers, media and design professionals, they can also buy errors and omissions insurance. So yes. In addition to cyber, it also applies to the other lines of business. So hope it answers the question, and I will move to the next question now. What is the maximum limit you can purchase for this cover?
I mean, our maximum limit as Tokyo Marine Kiln is $25 million, but we wouldn't normally put out limits that large. It's very easy to build capacities of towers of capacity. I mean, it depends on, for a Middle East company, so we'd recommend, say for a financial institution, to buy $100 million, and that's easily available in the London market. Yeah,
I would like to add also here, the choose of the limit is totally dependent on the nature of the business and the exposure concerned with the business, which determines how much coverage an insured party should acquire. So based on that, the limits can be deployed. It can be arranged. Whether buying too much can expose the company or insured paying more premium, or having less limit secured can also expose the business to have the inadequate cover also. So it really varies depending on the nature of the business and the appetite of the insured, how much they want to insure and how much they want to keep. I would like to move to the next question. Can you elaborate a bit more how the complete cycle from the breach till reimburse works?
Sure. So again, it all depends on what's actually happened. But just to recap on how the breach response would work, our nominated law firm would receive a call from the insured. We take some initial details and we'd ask for things like system logs, so we can maybe just give a preliminary analysis to see what might have occurred. From there, the lawyers will determine effectively who they need to speak to. So if it's a ransom, if there's a ransomware attack, we would probably want to speak to an IT forensics company with a specialism in extortion negotiations. If it's a data breach, the lawyers would probably want to speak to a credit bureau and to speak to an IT forensics firm to determine whose data has been lost, because we can figure anything that happens on a computer system is logged. So with IT forensics, you can figure out exactly what's actually happened. And once we have an IT forensic report, we know whether it's a covered loss or not. And if there's a security breach, it's a covered loss. And then from there, if it's a business interruption loss, we would appoint forensic accountants who would determine the lost profit or increased cost of working, and we'd effectively, much in the same way that a normal property business interruption loss is calculated, we'd come to an agreement with the insured, and that would be the reimbursement. If there is a legal liability to a third party, we would provide the legal defence costs, as well as any liability due to the third party. But normally with data breaches, it's very difficult to win to sue companies who've lost your data, because it's very difficult to prove your loss, especially now that we have access to identity theft insurance and credit freezes, just because any potential loss that you may have suffered as a result of your identity being stolen is nullified with ID theft insurance. Because if someone takes out, say, a credit card in your name using data that was stolen from you or from a company, it's very easy for us to ensure that that identity theft is stopped very quickly. So that's in a roundabout way how we do it, but there's always a complication, and there's always problems getting from overcoming the initial incident, repairing everything. It's all an expensive process, and we cover all of those recovery costs. But it's very, very difficult to say here is a blueprint of how we would respond. That's basically what we aim to do. And again, we leverage our experience to determine the right outcomes in the situation. And again, being able to make those decisions in a matter of minutes can literally mean the difference between tens of millions of dollars on a loss. And we have seen that on our own book.
Okay. We move to another question, which is relating to COVID-19, how it is impacting the cyber risk to the companies, and how can they face any risk out of that?
Yes, absolutely. So obviously with lots of people working from home, suddenly you have a much wider network space. And you have to think, if you go into your office, you will have had your IT team set up all of the workstations. They would have configured all of the firewalls. It was very easy to manage and off because everyone physical location. But as soon as people start going and working from home, they might be using devices that you haven't approved, devices that don't have the same amount of security as the main network does. The biggest issue that we've seen resulting from COVID and working from home is it's really exposed companies that have remote access but do not use multi-factor authentication. And what that is a soft token or single sign-on. So if I log in remotely, I should need something like an authenticator, which has a one-time password that gets me onto the network. Otherwise, that means all I need to get access to your network is a username and password, and that means I can access your network from anywhere. And once I've done that, I can deploy ransomware, which is what we've seen a lot of. So, and this doesn't just go for COVID exposure. I'd say a very large proportion of all of the ransomware attacks that we've seen in the last 12 months have only been successful because the insureds did not have multi-factor authentication for remote access. I appreciate that that's a long technical term. I'll email Seib afterwards with some points, and they can send out some little IT security tips for COVID afterwards that I'll provide to them. But that's really the main issue. Everybody's working remotely, and it also, when you're in the office environment, you may be more concentrated on vetting emails. One of the problems that we've actually seen is people thinking that their colleagues have emailed them, but it's actually a phishing attack by a hacker. And it works because you don't have your colleague next to you to say, did you mean to email me this? You just trust that it's legitimate.
Yeah. Okay, we move to the next question, which is as an extension. Can we add cybercrime in the cover?
So if we are talking about social engineering, which is where someone tricks you into sending money to a third party, we don't cover that because that's crime cover. There's a cover for that available in the crime market. What we can do is provide cover for a theft of funds by hack. So what that means is somebody hacks into your system, accesses your bank, and sends money away. But again, this is often covered by computer crime policies which exist. They're a lot cheaper. The wordings have been tested. The problem that we see is that crime is being added to cyber policies. The loss ratios when you strip out the crime cover are a lot better. So we don't necessarily get the money that we should for cybercrime. The crime market, again, is a lot more consistent. We suggest putting it into the crime market because whilst the attack occurs with a computer system, the ultimate goal is a theft of funds. And the coverage for cyber, we're looking to provide, again, first-party business interruption, data recovery, and liabilities to third parties for loss of third-party data. So we're only looking to cover specific perils. We can't just put every single type of any type of exposure that occurs and is connected to a computer system. We can't do under a cyber policy because the market's not big enough, and it would just make everybody's premiums go through the roof. There's enough claims activity, in my view, under traditional cyber policies that justify buying it without having to worry about theft of funds, which can be insured elsewhere.
It seems to be a very interesting topic because we're receiving a lot of other questions. So I will move to the next question. How does the cover for recovery of data works? How we get indemnified in this case? Like how will an insurance company assist in recovering lost data?
So when we, you've heard me say ransomware a lot, but it's the most prevalent type of loss we're having. The way a ransomware virus works is it encrypts your data, which means you can't access it without a decryption key, which you don't have. The hacker has. That's what they're asking payment for. In the process of encryption of data, you may damage or corrupt data. So the first point of call, again, we look at backups. If the backups aren't available, we would literally pay an IT forensic consultant to recreate all of that data. Now, however long that takes, we would just continue paying effectively until the data is restored. But again, we become very good at the breach response process, meaning that very rarely happens. But again, it's dependent on the situation. It depends on how good the insured backups are. It depends on how good the systems are, how much the IT security team at the insured is able to cooperate. So there's a bunch of factors.
Yeah. Okay. Another question is, how should we do risk assessment part?
Okay, so much of the insurance broking for cyber is done just with proposal forms, and we're quite happy to accept a proposal form. And if we have additional questions, we'll provide them. It's very simple. I mean, we like to get a good overview of the insured's network security. And from there, we can make an assessment based on their size, their industry, their region, the local laws, and those are all the factors that we take into account, as well as the actual exposure. So again, we look at the daily financial losses from a business interruption perspective, and from there, we can punch out some insurance rates.
We move to the next question, which is relating to what are the proactive protection measures should be taken by the insured, or once in case of any incident happen, or before happening of the incident.
Sure. So the first thing I'd say is train your staff, because they're the weakest link, and train all the staff. The other things you should be doing is periodically reviewing access to data. Like, does everybody need access to all areas of the network at all times? We would look. I think the biggest technology purchase that you could make is something called behavioral antivirus, which is a next generation antivirus, which uses artificial intelligence to determine unusual activity on a network. And it's different to traditional antivirus because a traditional antivirus looks for what's called a signature. And every virus will have a signature in their code, which is designed to be detected by an antivirus. And if that signature tests positive, the antivirus will shut down the virus. But these don't work anymore very well. So to protect yourself against new types of threats, machine learning really is needed. And you can actually buy these platforms that are commercially available. I'd say those are the key things: removing access from people that don't need access, training staff, and investing in new technology. But it's always unfortunately, it's always a moving goalpost. Again, I compare it to fire insurance. A fire risk is not going to change in the next 5 years, but cyber risks will. You can risk manage your properties to reduce risk of fire, but unfortunately, lots of people are trying to get into cybercrime, and they are finding ways around all of these issues, all of these protections. So you have to constantly be improving. But again, that's a cultural thing within your business. If you take your IT security culture seriously, I think you will get the best technology. You will get your staff will be trained. All of those things will follow naturally.
Thanks, Alice. And meantime, I have another question. How much limit we can normally get on a cyber buyback extension?
When you say a buyback extension, how do you mean, like on a property insurance policy?
Yes, I believe this is the intention.
I mean, if you want to buy cyber property damage cover, so affirmative coverage for physical damage occurring as a result of a cyber attack. Tokyo Marine Kiln does write a separate policy for this. We can write a $25 million limit. We have an ex-property underwriter in our team who is now a cyber underwriter, so we have specific expertise. But I wouldn't recommend getting a buyback because the wordings are very bad. Yeah. The other thing you need to remember is if you buy a separate cyber policy, you get the services. If you buy a property insurance policy, you're not going to be able to call a loss adjuster to who would respond to a property incident to respond to a cyber incident. They're not going to know what to do. You're taking a huge chance, and also the property wordings aren't worded as well as cyber wordings. They're hundreds of pages long. The buybacks are pretty unclear. The reason we came out of a separate cyber property damage policy is to address these concerns because, again, the property market doesn't have the same amount of expertise that we do. So we feel that we can better service the market by having a separate product rather than a buyback.
I hope it answers the question. Another question we have, any industry which is excluded or cannot be covered against cyber risk?
From Kiln's perspective, we don't like technology companies and hotels and airlines because they've just proven to be loss-making generally. But in terms of the industries that we do write, we write online retail, physical retail, healthcare, financial institutions, manufacturers, oil and gas, power transmission and generation. We have a very broad appetite outside of those excluded classes.
Okay. We have another question. Does the cover include the third parties like vendors?
So for when you say third parties like vendors, do you mean for business interruption?
Yes, which may be affecting the contingency business interruption.
Yes, so we have a contingent business interruption insuring agreement which covers all IT service providers as standard. We can add non-IT service providers on a named basis, but we prefer not to do this. It also attracts large additional premiums. Also, in the 4 years that this cover has been available, the non-IT contingent business interruption, we've seen so few claims that it's not, for me, I don't think it's the biggest concern. I think your biggest concern is your own network as a result that is affected by ransomware or part of an IT service provider's network which you use being affected. And again, we are seeing more managed service providers being breached because if you breach the managed service provider, you can get access to hundreds of their clients and then you can hold them to ransom too. Whereas why would you wouldn't necessarily attack someone in the supply chain who's completely unrelated. It just doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah. We are happy to receive as much as questions and to answer back to most of them. Another question, Alex, we have received now. What are the most common exclusions not covered under the cyber risk insurance?
So I'd say the key ones are we don't cover war, which is standard. We do not cover infrastructure, so satellites, overhead cables, power transmission cables, things like that. Because that would just mean a portfolio loss. If you take out, say, the power grid, you're going to have a total outage across the entire country. So that's not an insurable portfolio. That's too large to insure. Other than that, we don't have any security exclusions. So there's no minimum security requirements under the policy. We don't have any conditions precedent. The only claims conditions that we have is that you engage with our breach response as soon as you become aware of an incident so that we can take over the handling of the incident.
Okay, another question is from risk management viewpoint. Do you evaluate and assist with improvement of the cyber infrastructure to better safeguard the company from the attack?
So with Tokyo Marine Kiln, if you buy a policy on our wording, we can actually provide up to 5% of the gross premium towards various risk management services. And that can be a consultation with the lawyers who will respond to the incidents, and they can prepare all the people at the insured, and that's the one we'd recommend. There's bits and pieces of software and other sort of cybersecurity training that we can provide. But the best thing we think you can do is speak to our breach responders so that it's the first time that you speak to them isn't while you're having your incident, because it's very helpful when everyone's introduced, everyone knows who they're supposed to speak to. You pick up the phone and it's very, very smooth. One thing that will actually occur post-breach is the insured is obviously entitled to see the forensic IT report, and in that report it will outline all of the discovered vulnerabilities in the network, and from there the insured can actually undertake actions to resolve all of those recommendations by themselves, because they're usually quite straightforward.
Yeah. We have another question. Have you ever seen event cancelled due to cyber attack? And if so, how it was compensated?
Sorry, I didn't get the first part of the question.
It is relating to the event cancellation, so due to the cyber attack.
Okay. Okay. The answer is no, just because when you think about events that are booked, let's just say a conference. When you book a conference, you're planning it a year in advance. You're going to book the caterers, the exhibition halls, you're going to sell your passes. You can host a conference with the conference's IT network being down. So even if an attack was to occur a week before an event, if we resolved it in the same day, I don't think the event would necessarily be cancelled. I haven't seen that type of loss personally.
Yeah. Apart from cyber insurance, an event cancellation insurance can be taken, where maybe this risk can be integrated with sub-limits or through different arrangements. Of course, there are different solutions, but under the cyber, it is not possible. I think.
Yeah, what I would say is just if you're looking for specific coverage for event cancellation, I wouldn't say I don't think you should try and get around not buying that policy by throwing it into the cyber, because you won't have the certainty of whether it's covered or not, because it's not really our intent to cover those incidents. Yeah.
So I think most of the questions have been answered, unless if still someone wants to add some more questions, that can be answered separately also. But I think we have done this one, and we really appreciate, and we thank you very much to all the audiences.